Well, hello. I'm Father Ron Oakham, a Carmelite, and really pleased to be here at the parish this evening, Friday evening, that we're doing this, and Saturday, we got some masses on Sunday. Really, tonight we're going to be exploring the rite of Christian initiation of adults, and then tomorrow, spirituality of baptism. So in beginning our session this evening, what I'd like to do is to use an adapted prayer from the Second Vatican Council, a prayer that they used every session that they gathered. And I chose that because this rite comes to us through the renewal and the reform of that council. So let us begin. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. We come before you, Holy Spirit, conscious of our sinfulness, but aware that we gather in your mercy. Come to us, remain with us, and enlighten our hearts. Give us light and strength to know your will, to make it our own, and to live it in our lives. Guide us by your wisdom, support us with your power, for you are God, sharing the glory of the Father and Son, with whom you live and reign as God, forever and ever. Amen. I have to wake up the computer. When I let it sit like this happens. So there we go. So I title this Ministers and Ministries in Christian Initiation, because I want to look at what the rite expects or anticipates or hopes we will do as a parish community. In the publicity on this, I mentioned it. We have the adage, it takes a village to raise a child. We can adapt it to, it takes a parish to raise a Christian. And that's really the vision that the rite has. And so in paragraph 9 of the introduction, which in the official language of the church is called the Prenotanda, it gives us a section called ministries and offices. And that if you open up any of our sacramental rites in these Prenotanda, the introductory paragraphs, there's always a section that talks about the ministers and the offices for that sacrament. And so in this one, it's in paragraph 9, the people of God. Right? And it talks about the people of God first, the faithful of the community, and then it talks about sponsors, it talks about godparents, then it talks about the bishop. The priests, they get 2 paragraphs, and the deacons. And so after that we have the catechists, and so we have a whole listing of various groups that is seen as being a part of this initiation ministry. But they also kind of cluster. So sponsors and godparents are really representatives of the people of God, the faithful themselves. Okay? They're acting on behalf of the whole Catholic community. The priests, the deacons, and the catechists, they're actually ministering in the name of the bishop, who is the chief pastor of all the parishes. And so he can't be there to do it all. He delegates it out. And so they're really working on his behalf, okay, and seeing it from there. So the priests and the deacons, they have to have what are called faculties. They have to have faculties in order to be able to celebrate any sacraments in diocese. A lot of people think just because you're a priest, you can celebrate a sacrament. No, you can't. You have to have the official faculty or permission, delegation of the bishop. So we really do act as his representatives. Catechists fall in that category because as we read along in the rite, we find out that to talk about officially deputed catechists. Deputed is kind of an interesting word that they use. And so some dioceses actually, in their training of catechists, will have a track for sort of advanced level catechetical training for catechists who are going to serve in the rite of Christian initiation of adults as initiation ministers. And they actually have them being delegated to be those ministers. With that delegation comes the ability to, or the qualifications to preside literally over some of the lesser rites, not the transitional rites, but some of the prayers and the blessings and stuff like that. So that it's in there. So that's why the catechist comes down under the bishop rather than, it's obvious a member of the parish. But in terms of who are they operating in relationship with is the bishop, who is the chief catechist in the diocese. Okay? So when it talks about then the people of God, it's going to give a whole little bit of a listing of things about what they should be doing. And with this, our church makes a shift in its operational mode in terms of initiating adults. It's going to move us from the priest as the initiator, right? Prior to the council, if someone was coming along and wanted to become Catholic, they would usually meet with one of the priests of the parish, and he would work with them, one-on-one most likely, using a book called Father Smith Instructs Jackson. So a classic sort of reference to this is, oh, that's the Father Smith Instructs Jackson time, you know.
Really what it was called?
That's the name of the book, yeah, Father Smith Instructs Jackson. And so he would work with that person, working through the different chapters of the book, right? They would develop nice relationship, hopefully. They would learn about the church in varying ways. But when it was all over, they knew him, maybe teaching the church, and had no idea about the parish because they weren't part of it at all. And so it shifts then to the faithful, to the parish community as the initiators, right? And it says this: the people of God, as represented by the local church, should understand and show that the initiation of adults is the responsibility of all the baptized. Hence, the entire community must help the candidates and the catechumens throughout the process of initiation. Right? I know. When we come across this paragraph, here's the first thing that comes to the mind of a lot of initiation team directors, coordinators, is, I can't even get enough people on the team. How am I going to get the whole parish? I was like, well, it's a need to change your understanding of role. That the team really isn't becoming Father Smiths instructing Jacksons, but that the team is really, to use a rather agricultural image, the team is really the cow prod of the parish. Cow prod is the thing that the farmers use to poke the cows and get them moving. So the catechumenate team is really the cow prod of the parish, to stimulate them, to initiate them, get them, draw them in to doing their work. Okay? It's not that the team is going to do it. And that's what I really want to begin, why I want to begin with looking at this role, because we need to expand our understanding of who's doing the initiation. So the parish community, in fact, does form the new members. Okay? Whether the catechumenal team has had any real contact with the parishioners, drawing them into the process, they do in fact form. So some stories from the road. It was La Crosse, Wisconsin. As a part of the North American Forum of the Catechumenate, we would do these week-long institutes of training for catechumenal leaders in the different dioceses. And we'd arrive on Saturday evening. In those days, you got a better fare if you stayed over Saturday night. And they would run from Sunday afternoon to Friday afternoon. So on Sunday morning, the team would have been there, arrived on Saturday. There'd be 4 or 5 of us coming in from different parts of the country, from varying pastoral ministries. Only one of us would really be from the national office. And so we'd be there together, and then we'd go to Mass. Well, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, we were at the college run by the Franciscan sisters that were there. And so it has it's a college chapel, but it's a good-sized church. And it has an intentional community. That is, people who wanted to be part of that community of worship, and so they'd come on Sundays. And one of the traditions that they had was that they would give out a little pamphlet with the hymns for the day, rather than a book and stuff like that that was published particularly for it. And so, because they were also intentional, they really wanted to be there and worship together, and so the whole community sang. And so the whole assembly is singing, and they're holding up their little folletos and singing from them. Right? We're sitting in back of a little family who has a preschool child. And at one point, when we're getting to go to communion, she is actually laying down on her back. Okay? And one leg is up, and the top of the bottom of the sole of her shoe is just at that ridge of the pew, sitting there. And she's holding her little paper. But I notice it's upside down. And she's preschool, so she can't really read. But I notice she's singing. So we go to communion ends, the hymn ends, and echoing through the church, this angelic voice Santa Claus is coming to town. And it was July. The community was forming her. What we do is we hold this paper and we sing. So she held the paper, which she couldn't read, of course, which she done, and so she sang something that she knew. The community was forming her. On the other side of the spectrum, I was in Louisville, Kentucky for another institute. And I went to this parish on Sunday morning. And actually, I don't think it was for a whole institute because the whole team wasn't there. Maybe I'm there for a conference or something and working. And I go to the church. And being a priest who's always up in front, it's nice to see things from a different perspective. So I like to sit in the back, you know, where the real Catholics sit. So I sat back there, you know, and they announced the hymn. I picked up the book and the hymnal and I started to sing. And there really wasn't anybody right next to me. The woman was about halfway down the pew. Before we were at the end of the first verse, she was right next to me with her hand on my arm and saying, "We don't sing back here." I looked at her, I said, "It's obvious, but I do." Because nobody was singing, okay? And so a shyer person, are they going to pick up the hymnal and sing when no one's singing? The community was forming them. They was forming them. I lived in Torreon, Coahuila, Mexico for a period of time serving in one of our parishes. And prior to that, I had gone down to that part of my role as a superior for the community. I'd gone down, I was learning Spanish, I was learning the culture, and so I said, I didn't have a parish assignment, so I was free to do this. I said, I think I'm going to go down for Holy Week to really experience this from the Mexican cultural experience of this time of holy time of the church. And so I went down with them and stuff, and a couple of our interns were there, and that's part of why I was visiting with them, to check in on the interns, our students in formation, and helped out with the Triduum. And so I was assigned to this one community. In that parish community, there were 14 different communities with their own little chapels spread about. And there were only 4 of our guys there covering them. It would take a week before they could celebrate Mass with all the communities. So I was there helping them out. And as we gathered, I was talking with the intern, and I said, now we don't have anybody baptized, but we will bless water and the sprinkler. I said, but you know, one of the things I've reckoned with is that in the cultural difference would be is Anglos are people of parade. We like to watch it happen. But Mexicans are people of procession. They like to do it and to be involved in it. I said, so why don't we do this? Rather than doing the asperges after the renewal of baptismal promise, let's invite them to come forward to a bowl of water. We were outdoors. They didn't even have a chapel. This is so new a community. We were just out on a corner lot. That's all we had. And they brought their chairs and they had their stuff that was out there. So let's get a table and let's put the water on there and do that type of thing. Oh, okay, yeah, we can do that, no problem. And as we were arriving, I thought it was really intriguing because people were coming, they were bringing their chairs. They also had vessels of water. It might be an empty Coke bottle. It could have been all kinds of different, plastic containers type of things that they had. And decorated, home decorated candles. I said, candles and water, they know what this is about. He said, oh yeah, this community has always gathered at the vigil. At Easter Vigil, they've always gathered. But this is the first time they're going to have Eucharist because there's never been a priest here for them. So it's going to be a special night, So it's okay, well, let's do this. So we gathered the stuff up and, we had to take a little time and said to them, oh, we need to get a few things if you're going to wait. All I could think is, tell an Anglo community, oh, we got to get ready, wait a little bit. Oh, they were fine. They just went on talking and stuff like that. We were ready. We go on with the celebration. And we get to the renewal of vows, baptismal promises, and then we come to the blessing of water, which of course is one of the first time they've done this. So we invite them forward just to come and bless themselves. And people were coming up in different ways and just taking the water like we do when we come in off the holy water fountain. Others were taking a little bit more and stuff. And there were some kids in the group too. And these 2 young boys in the back, they kept looking out to see what was going on. They don't know what's happening. Keep looking out to see what's going on. This elder woman who is really dressed in Sunday finery, coming up about 4 or 5 people ahead of them. And she comes up, she bends down, she grabs the water in her hands and lifts it up and just lets it flow over her. And her face was radiant. And I just thought, I want a picture. It was so magnificent, but it's in here. And And the boys were looking, and they saw it. You saw their eyes just open up like crazy. And they sort of looked at each other, and they started rolling up their sleeves. And when it was their turn at the water, with dignity and respect, they did the very same thing she did. They scooped up the water and let it pour over them. I said, the assembly formed them in the way. So whether we like it or not, our assemblies do participate in the initiation of new members, and they form them. They form them in how we worship in particular, but they can also form them in how do we live out our Christian life. If we involve them in the community, they can do it. So, kind of think of that. How does your worshiping community form the new members or anyone coming to us? What is the experience of the worshiping community in your parish? Are they actively participating, or are they passively waiting to get done? Because that's how they're going to form the newcomers to us. There are 5 ways, when it talks about these, there are 5 ways in which the rite identifies for the faithful to be part of this initiation process. So 9.1 says, during the period of evangelization and pre-catechumenates, that first period of time, the faithful should give the candidates evidence of the spirit of the Christian community by welcoming them into their homes, into personal conversations, into community gatherings. So right in their very beginning, we shouldn't be forming insular groups, isolating them from the community, as what was happening with Father Smith and Strux Jackson. He was meeting with them in the office, not in the community. And so bringing them in, and so that they are meeting people right from the very beginning. And so they'll invite them to their homes, they can invite them to conversations, seeing them around. This is very public, as well as to events that are happening in the parish, right? Things go, come to us. And we'll really see there's a particular person who becomes key for helping to manage that type of a process, but that it's really the role of the faithful to really be doing it, right? Not to create that insular group, but to weave them into the community. 9.2 tells us, at the celebrations belonging to the period of the catechumenate, the faithful should be present whenever possible and take an active part in the responses, prayers, singing, and acclamations. Okay? So it envisions that these rituals are going to be with the community present, right? They need to be a part of it. So for example, with the rite of acceptance into the order of catechumens, the rite doesn't presume it's celebrated on Sunday. It presumes it's celebrated at some point, and even gives specific readings and prayers for it. But what it does presume also is that members of the faithful are going to be there, because we're welcoming them into this dimension, the parish of our church. Well, it's the faithful. So I think of it as a mountains and Mohammed issue. Will the mountain go to Muhammad, or will Muhammad go to the mountain? Will members of your assembly, of your community, come out on Tuesday night to do this? It might be easier to bring those inquirers to the Sunday assembly because they're there. And so the practice across our country, I believe, is that the rite of acceptance, for example, is celebrated at a Mass on Sunday so that the faithful are present, okay? And hopefully they're taking an active role in it. And that means, how are we planning it? I call it planning that it's assembly inclusive, so that they do feel that they have a role, and it's not, oh, that group is having a little soiree on my Mass time. How are we including them to be active members of this ritual action? Okay? We'll consider ideas about this at some point. And so it does that they're part of the worshiping experience with these rites. 9.3 says, on the day of election, so this is now into the Lenten period at the start of purification and enlightenment, the faithful should be sure to give honest and carefully considered testimony about the catechumens. Well, if they're to do that, that means they've known them through the catechumenal formation. Who are they? How have they seen the Lord working in their lives? This type of a thing, okay? And so they have a role for them in there. And it might not be that they would give actual testimony, but in the rite of sending, which is a United States adaptation in anticipation of the rite of election with the bishop at the cathedral or in some other place, but with the bishop, the sponsors in finishing up their ministry are invited to give testimony. And so they speak on behalf, or they just answer ritual questions. But then the presider looks at the assembly and says, this is what they believe. Do you concur? Well, how can you say yes or no if you don't know the people, right? So it presumes there's been interaction throughout the catechumen so that they can give a valid affirmation of the testimony that's being given. 9.4. During Lent, so now the election leads us into Lent, the faithful should participate in the rites of the scrutinies. Again, that's why they're on Sundays. They don't have to be. But again, where's the faithful going to be? They're going to be at Sunday Mass. They should participate in the presentations. The presentation of the Lord's Prayer, the presentations of the Creed, which occur during the weekdays. They may be anticipated in the period of the catechumenate. And give the elect the example of their own renewal in the spirit of penance, faith, and charity. So they should see that we're not just putting them through some Lenten practice, but our whole community is involved in a Lenten practice. And so they're giving a witness of how do we as a Catholic church, Catholic community, keep Lent. Okay, how do we keep Lent? And then at the Easter Vigil, they should attach great importance to renewing their own baptismal promises. Okay, so that they become a witness then of the vitality of living with persons. Okay. Now, sometimes you say, well, yeah, but Easter Vigil is probably our least attended of rituals because it's so long and stuff. But if we've been involving members of the community throughout their initiation process, and we come, by the way, you know so-and-so that you met, this person that you've been journeying with, they're going to be baptized and receive confirmation and celebrate Eucharist. Please come, please come. Well, they've got a reason to go. I know somebody that's there. And so it draws them in, and hopefully it'll be a good experience that they can come the next year. This is a wonderful celebration of our faith, and so they come back, all right? It means somewhat being proactive to invite them in. 9.5, during the period immediately after baptism, the faithful should take part in the masses for the neophytes. Right, so this is that last period, the period of purification, of mystagogy. So take part in the Mass of Neophytes. Well, what are those? Actually, they're the Sunday Masses of Easter. Those are truly the Masses of the Neophytes. In the early church, and this ritual is a reclaimed process from the early church, it was these 8 days that were in this octave. And so every day they would come to their church and they would have what they call the mystagogical homilies, in which the priest would unfold for them what they experienced at the vigil. Opening up this was the time of sacramental catechesis, based on their personal experience. We kind of move it around. We do all the catechesis first. The rite is trying to move us in a different direction. But so they would meet, and then on the second Sunday, the Sunday afterwards, the 8th day, they would then take off their white robe. They've worn it every day, and they would take off the white robe. And so the second Sunday of Easter, or what we know as second Sunday of Easter now, had the name of Whit Sunday. If you ever heard that name, Whit Sunday, based on white, because they took off the white robes. As I think of that experience and stuff like that, and knowing the hygienic processes of those days, they've worn that thing for 8 days. I think if you take it off, it could probably stand up on its own.
When was that term used? What century or?
That would be in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries. Yeah, that's the earlier time. By the 6th century, this fades away because we're baptizing infants. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. It was never done away with. It faded away. Mm-hmm. It faded away. Yeah, this whole process. They should also welcome the neophytes in open arms in charity. Okay. Because now they're full members of the parish, and so they can be a part of all kinds of things, you know. It's like all the organizations and ministry leaders, you know, rushing in on them like vultures, you know, you're trying to get all these new members. That should have been done long ago with that. And help them to feel more at home in the community of the baptized, right? Because they're new members to it. It's still new, but hopefully not as unknown as it might be when they've been isolated from the group. So those are the paragraphs that really speak about the faithful and their role, all the different things they do, and during the different parts of the process itself. Paragraph 75 is what I call the Charter of Catechesis. And this is where we outline for ourselves what makes a complete catechesis. One of the words that uses, they should have a complete catechesis. And oftentimes what most catechists of the right, and priests even think, complete catechesis means they know all the chapters of the Catholic Catechism. That's not the Church's vision of a complete catechesis. The Church's vision of a complete catechesis is that the catechetical components has all these elements. There are 4 elements: liturgy, word, community, and service. Right? This is a liturgical rite. And the presumption is really that the starting point of their formation is with the liturgy. So in the rite of acceptance, they're membered to us at the table of the Word, and they're anticipated that they're there every Sunday at the table of the Word, and it's from that table of the Word, the liturgy, that the catechesis flows. So the liturgy embodies the Word, the message, and we build the passing on the tradition and the teachings of the Church based on what Sunday's readings are about. Our teachings are based in Scripture, and so it seeks to make that connection real clear, which for many Catholics is not, and is where some of the evangelical Protestants in particular beat up the Catholics. Where in the Scripture does it say this? Where is in the Scripture? And they don't know they might believe, they might understand the doctrine, but they don't know where it comes from. It's disconnected. This seeks to render that abuse. So that they will be raised to know where does our teachings and our traditions come from in the Scriptures and our tradition, so the Word, and that they're part of the community, being woven into the community, and are part of being involved in ministry and service. Sometimes it's very common that they wait to introduce them to ministry till the Easter time, mystagogy. No, being involved in ministry, outreach, service is a part of catechetical formation. What service, what outreach flows out of this Sunday's reading? And so we see something of that, what it is. Where in our parish is that being lived out? And so they invite people in from those ministries, those organizations, to speak about how we're living that gospel message. And so they see it in there. And maybe you can go and experience with them, okay, and building up. And so it's all this makes, when you have the liturgy, the word, the community, the service, all in together in a week's time, you're doing a complete catechesis on that subject matter being presented on that Sunday. Right? Thus, that whole sense of bringing in the community, particularly for the role of rubbing shoulders with them and involved in the service. Now, when we talk about it's the responsibility of all, the problem with that is we learn quickly that the responsibility of all is the responsibility of none. It doesn't get done. It just doesn't happen. So we need to do something to make sure it does happen, and thus comes the role of the initiation team. To draw a representative group from the general parish population to be that team. And it really should reflect the parish community. Gender, race, age should really look kind of like a mini version of what the community is, seeing it in that. And so the different elements of the community are represented on the team. Right? The team needs to be led by a coordinator. I like to use the word coordinator better than a director. Okay, because they're going to coordinate all these different actions rather than directing it. I think coordinator is better. So I want to begin by let's look at the team coordinator. Right? What is the role of the team coordinator? The team coordinator is the one who bears the vision of the whole process of initiation. Right? Really needs to be steeped in the vision the Church is holding out. And that's one of the things they're picking up, for example, in the renewal and the revision of the rite into the order of Christian initiation of adults. One of the things they did not change is the vision of the rite, which has not been well lived in all these years. Okay, basically we haven't really caught on to the idea that it is a formation process. we're running an education program. And I think that happens particularly in the States because we are so steeped in an educational process. The whole Catholic school system. This is not an educational process. It is a formation. It's not an educational program. It's a formation process. And so the coordinator really needs to be aware of that vision and where the different things fall into place. Okay? So for example, the presentation of the Lord's Prayer, it's one of the two presentations, the Creed and the Lord's Prayer. That doesn't happen until well into the catechumenate, or maybe not even until the period of purification and enlightenment. So beginning in the pre-catechumenate, let us get together in the prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father is like, you missed the point. First of all, they haven't been signed with the cross. That happens at the rite of acceptance. So signing with the cross is out of place to do that first. They haven't been signed yet. And they haven't been given the prayer, Our Father. That comes later. What prayer should we use? Well, go to the original prayer book. The Psalms. The Psalms are the original prayer book of our community of faith. And that's the prayer book from which the Liturgy of the Hours, the second of our liturgies, the Eucharist being the first, is drawn. The Psalms. That's where we should be introducing the prayer, and it leads us into then the responsorial psalms and in the liturgy of the word. So when we get to that point, they know the psalms, are familiar with us, the notion of psalms, and doing that in the reflection. So that the coordinator needs to really understand the vision, what it's trying to accomplish, and where the parts of all of it fit in the whole construction, so that he can lead the group properly in what they're doing. Needs to be an organizer, a person who is organized, okay? A disorganized person will not be very helpful. You need the gift of organization. Now, they don't need to be anal retentive, but they need to be a good organizer and hold things in place. You need a good communicator, okay? To be sure to communicate with the other members of the team and stuff, but also with the parish staff, in particular when we come to liturgies, the presiders of those types of things. So be a really good communicator. And with the parish at large, so the parish understands we're about initiating adults, it's going on, and what's happening within that. And then the bridge builder, building bridges between people and the team and the group itself of inquirers become catechumens, but them and the community, the parish community, a bridge builder, and the different organizations and stuff within it. Is a developer of a team, really working to bring people together to work as a team, which means knowing what each is doing on the different parts. We're not all going to do all the pieces. This is a problem in terms of most practical experiences of implementing the rite, is the whole team does everything in the whole process, that by the time Easter comes, they're glad the tomb is empty because they're crawling in, they're dying, they're dead. Yeah, they're exhausted. That's not the vision. Yeah, not the vision. Okay, so, developing a team that work, so we know different people are doing different things, but what are they doing, okay? So that we're doing it together and not in opposition to each other. Is a resource to the team members. So in the different parts of the process, being able to give them things that can help them to work through whatever the task is that they're overseeing as a part of the process. So as a resource to the team members. What's a good readings for having it, what a good piece of direction, or even who's somebody good to talk with about this particular area so that they're able in good skill to do what they're supposed to do as a part of the initiation team. Evaluator and planner, to be sure to look and say, so how did that work? What can we do better next time around? Right? So there's always a follow-through to see about that and doing it better. Evaluator and planner. So he calls together a core team, okay? That representative group from the parish. But they're not the ones who are going to do everything else. We go back. Remember, the team is the cow prod, okay? And so she's the coordinator of the team coordinator is a coordinator of coordinators, really. So from there, we have a hospitality. One of those team members is going to be a hospitality coordinator, right? To reach out and to make hospitable situations. One of the experiences I had with this is the hospitality coordinator recognized one of the things we want to do, yes, is be very welcoming to them, but we also want to introduce them to the parish and the parish to them. So she took it and said, what if we do this? we have varying ministries and organizations in the parish. What if we invite different ones to the different evenings? We would gather on Tuesday evenings, and we invite them to do the social that we will begin the session with. And so this was in a parish in Los Angeles, so you can't start till 7:30 because you have to wait for the commuting time to get dinner. And so what's this? Let's start with the social, and it'll be the dessert. So eat your dinner, but come for dessert. And so then she went out and she would invite different organizations, got a whole schedule, and inviting them in to come and present, have a dessert display or whatever, and there's drinks, and the people kind of arrived at have members of your organization, your ministry present with them to meet, to serve the dessert, but also meet these inquirers. We're in the pre-catechumenate, and she continued this throughout, actually, but she started it there. And so they would meet with them and talk with them and stuff, and then at one point have a little bit of an exposition about what is this ministry, what is this group, and what do they do in the church. So about a half an hour, and then the group would move off to do its session. They would clean up and they would go home. About an hour out of their night. And she did that all the way through, even through the catechumenate. All the sessions always had different groups. So we're already meeting people and stuff like that, within that dinner. So the hospitality coordinator isn't the one who has to bake all the cookies and pour all the punch, but gets other people to do it. Cow prod, drawing them in. We have a sponsor godparent coordinator. So someone who's responsible for the ministry of godparent. We're going to look at that in the second part tonight. Right? But they're the ones who call together, from the community, sponsors, trains them, so recruits them and trains them. We'll talk a little bit more about that role, but gets them, and monitors them throughout. It's an active ministry, not a passive ministry. We're going to look at the role of godparent and sponsor more. So there's somebody coordinating that, doing that. There's a liturgy coordinator, because of course this is a ritual of the church. The first of many rituals is the rite of acceptance into the order of catechumens, but there's all kinds of rituals throughout. And so there's the liturgy coordinator, hopefully works with music persons so that the liturgies have music in them, especially if they're not done in the context of a parish's liturgical celebration. There's the catechist coordinator. And this person is really going to be, it has to be an octopus. Because you've got to have many arms on this one. Because there's pre-catechumenate catechists. They have a task that's different than the catechumenate catechists. And really the pre-catechumenate should be going on year round. We should be ready to welcome the persons whenever they come, all right? Most parishes do this on an educational model, so they start in August and they end in May, Well, if God were, highly organized, one of the things we're recognizing through this is God is not organized. He would make sure that he moved their heart between August 15th and September 15th when the parish was beginning. And he does for some, and some respond. But you know what? He does the same thing in December and they show up in January. We start in September. And so, we have this wonderful program. Wait, ecclesiastical hold. No, we should be ready to be able to walk with them right away. So how do we do it? Well, one of them is by having pre-catechumenate catechists who are ready to walk with them at all points. The catechumenate catechists, there's two levels. There's the Sunday dismissal, the breaking open of the word, really reflecting on and discussing the scriptures, and then the passing on of the tradition, okay, the ongoing catechesis, which is the more instructional piece of it. We're going to get these dismissal. Look, do you have some scripture study groups? Do you have scripture groups? There's where you tap into your dismissal catechists. These are people who are working with the scriptures. And so that's the only thing they do, just the dismissal, okay? We have those. Then, of course, we have the purification and enlightenment period. These catechists are not instructors. They're retreat directors. It's a different dynamic. It's a different style. It's a different gift. So we had a couple of people who were, the only thing they did in the initiation process officially was that they were the purification and enlightenment, the P&E catechists. And it was a 6-week commitment, just through Lent. But they would get to know the people beforehand so that when they show up, it's not strangers. But they would lead them through then the experience of the Lenten time. And we would have mystagogical catechists, those who would, for the 8 weeks following upon the Easter celebration, unfolding the mysteries, doing the sacramental catechesis with them. And that's their only commitment for those 8 weeks. And so while they had a coordinator who was working with the catechist coordinator, oftentimes had 2 or 3 coordinators to work with this, as I say, multiple octopus arms reaching out to everybody. And so they were working with it. So the idea is that the team itself is not the group that's primarily doing the initiation, but drawing people in from the community to be a part of that process. And adjointly, in other ways. So those different ministry groups that came in as hospitality, when one of the transitional rites in particular was coming up, that hospitality coordinator remembered which groups were involved with this group that's coming through, and would go back to their director, their leaders, and say, by the way, the group that you met with, they're coming up to this rite. We hope some of your members will be there who met them. And so in the assembly, then, you have people who have a connection and will be much more involved in the ritual because they have a personal connection to it. But they're drawing them in through that, making all those linking and connections and stuff, right? So, it is the responsibility of all the baptized to be involved in the initiation of adults. And this is a vision that the church presents to us in a way of maybe starting to really tap into that, seeing the team as that cow prod, and how do we involve the parishioners in that. Any questions or comments to this at this point?
Can you give examples? For example, the purification and enlightenment. So when you're looking to cow prod the community, like, could you give examples of what ministries that are already happening match well with that?
So, looking for examples of during the period of purification, enlightenment, and Lent, what ministries would be a part of that. Generally speaking, that one, basically what you're looking to is, what is the parish doing during Lent? And involving them in that too. So is there a parish retreat, a Lenten retreat? Inviting them to be a part of the Lenten retreat and being sure that people know of them there. In their own reflections and preparing for the scrutinies, that you could invite parishioners to come, to be a part of that reflection. Because we're all called, the preparation for the scrutiny is really an examination of conscience. So inviting them into that, to be a part of those sessions, that it becomes part of the Lenten journey. And what's involved in that is really exploring the dimensions of sin. Those 3 scrutinies open up for us dimensions of sin: personal, social, systemic. And each of the 3 focus on something different. And that's a great thing for our faithful to learn itself. They pretty much know personal, but they don't understand social, and they surely don't understand systemic. How do we open that up for our parish community? By joining them with that. In that context. So it's more in that fashion.
Right. So kind of an example might be, say, we have a Christian meditation like centering prayer here, and so people who are very involved in Christian spirituality might be drawn to lead that. As an example.
As an example, yeah. So if you have a centering prayer group to draw on them, they might be better drawn in during the catechumenate when at different points you're looking at the traditions, the customs of prayer in our church. And so that they talk about it and they draw them in and explain it to them and give an experience of centering prayer, which some may key into. Oh, that was really great. You don't have to wait till post-Easter for them to come to that group anymore. They can come all the time. But there can also be people who are, more retreat-oriented. Is there a retreat ministry in the group? Is there a group that leads retreats or many days of reflection? That those would be the types of people to be involved, because the Lenten time is not a time of instruction. A lot of places use it as, oh my God, we've got 10 more chapters to do before Easter. No, it's not intended to be instruction. It's intended to be retreat-like, a period of spiritual reflection. And so who are good about doing that and involved in drawing them in, that type of stuff.
And just another example to get us thinking of with the hospitality, thinking of like men of faith or wings, they're grouped into small groups. So maybe, for example, a small faith group would take hospitality, or a shepherd group or something like that, or is that what you're saying? So like drawing from who's already out there,
right,
and organized.
And it could be, for example, you've got a big number of group in the wings, men. So in the first time that they come around, it's an explanation about what is this group, okay? And so the meeting, but then, they're in smaller groups. You don't want all, 100 some odd members, all there on that first night. Let's spread it out. And so we'll take different nights, meeting with them throughout the period. And as we're moving along, it could be that some of the women in the group, or when you have the men's group in there, I'm really needing to spend more time with men who think the same way or trying to live this out, or a woman who are, because I'm working a very secular, you should see the office I'm in. And they're really looking for somebody who thinks that way, Christian-wise and stuff. They could become part of the group now. They don't have to wait to be. Now, St. Vincent de Paul, not so much them, but the Knights of Columbus. Well, you do have to be a full party, member of the church before Knights. But St. Vincent de Paul, you don't. Or some other group, but so they can become involved, so that in the midst of the catechumenal period, particularly that longer period of time, they're not just meeting with the catechumenal group, but they are a part of other parts of the parish, according to their gifts. Somebody who has a real gift, you hear in the Ursula stories that they've got a gift for caring for the senior members, because you hear about how they've cared for the elderly of their family. And you see when they're talking about it that they get delight in that, So who are the members of the parish who are reaching out and ministering with the elderly? Is there a nursing home ministry? Is the ministry of the homebound? Okay, so that's one of the groups to invite for the hospitality. But then also, as you're learning about, to make connections. They don't have to wait till they've been fully initiated to be a part of that ministry group. And so while they meet on Tuesday night with the group, and then on Sunday with the group, they're also meeting Thursday with that ministry group, right? One becomes Catholic by rubbing shoulders with Catholics. And then the community is also being involved in the initiation and doing their part. Yeah. So it's really looking at making those connections. That's part of bridge building, that connecting, the core team coordinator being aware of all the different ministries around. That's part of the bridge building that I mentioned for them, and connecting, making the connections and drawing them in. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Unfortunately, most of the times what the look is kind of like very, as I say, insular. It's okay, we've got to take care of this group and we're all focused here, but we forget the parish out there. Well, that's no different than Father Smith instructs Jackson. All it's made is it's Father Smith instructing Jacksons. It's a very different vision of moving out, but very enlivening, a very enlivening mission. All right.
Does anyone have any questions? I just have one more thought, but if anybody can jump in. But I can see. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say it was a funny thing. So we just had these kiddos baptized. As a group of 5 middle schoolers, ranging in age from 5th to 9th grade. Thank you, Diane. It was quite the adventure and everything, but we, bounced along. But what was so interesting was, the Holy Spirit. It's you think, well, these are younger folks and everything like that, but just watching them over the period, because I only had probably 6-7 sessions with them before, it was just kind of how it worked out. But when you watch them and you kind of notice where the gifts were, and after they had been baptized and they had just walked over here, and just sharing with them, here's what I saw in you, and I wonder what you would think about being an altar server. I noticed the organization that you have. I noticed the sense during the time that we were here that you were very organized. They took turns to be a sacristan, to do the lighting and doing all the different things. And this little light lit up, and he said, really? Where do I get more information about that? And it was fun because just jumping onto things, but it's not just, hey, want to be an altar server. It's because I think you're gifted with this. Then it makes me think about this other thing you probably have never even heard of, or you've only just seen it,
Yeah. Especially with liturgical ministry, because they're not a part of the liturgy officially, so you got to kind of wait for that. But different things. But being attentive. So you're talking about that the young group that they had this year, which were middle school and high school kids, a little bit more difficult to connect them at large with the parish, but there are ways. But even at the end of after being back, looking at their gifts, what gifts you've seen in them through that time period, and then saying, hey, what do you think about this? And that's sort of that overview look of knowing what the church's needs are and what gifts there are, inviting them to be a part of that and meeting in with it, and then connecting them, with the groups in that area.
And they'd already been in youth ministry, up to this time for a year, 2 years, I think. So they had that connection.
And so it would be, kind of meeting with what are some of the youth activities that are going on. So they're part of that. Again, they're rubbing shoulders with other Catholics on those types of things. Or if the parish does really have a way of having youth involved in ministry, that they're involved in it, not liturgically, but other types of things, with that. In the parish in Tucson, one of the issues the St. Vincent de Paul community had was difficult to get new members, and they'd like to get younger people involved. And I said, well, here's one of the problems you have. When do you do your ministry? Monday through Friday, 9 to 12. Well, where do you think the younger members of our parish are? It's called work. They're not free to do this. Or younger, school, right. You need to do something on Saturdays. Then you can, they didn't really kind of think about that. And so they started that, and it was really interesting because they had they had families coming in, with the whole family, all the different generations. So they got the younger kids in and stuff like that. And so they did different things, they did different things. Some of it was really just organizing the food pantry because they got boxes coming in of foodstuffs from these different places. Others was, preparing the basic bags that go out during the week. And so, they wouldn't do the home visits, but they would be very much involved with being a part of, so that those who could be there from Monday through Friday when they were distributing the food could do it efficiently because of all the preparations that had gone on and stuff like that. So it's looking to other ways, involving them in the gift.
The Mystagogy Catechist, the 8-week sacramental gifts, what kind of?
So the Mystagogy Catechist, which is the 8 weeks of Easter time, their role is to, in classic language, unfold the mysteries. Unfold the mysteries. Mysteries, and where mystagogy gets its name, it's the Greek for mysteries, is the first term we used for sacraments. So unfolding the mysteries is really talking about sacramental catechesis. Right? And so it's helping them to explore the sacraments and come to know them from their personal experience of being baptized. And so it's a much different process than we've done. We believe you have to teach them all about the sacrament first. There's a whole sacramental preparation that happens. Sacramental catechesis comes afterwards.
So which ministries would you use towards that?
Okay, so in terms of inviting people in, well, the process for example, looking to people who are very much involved in baptismal ministry. And so maybe the baptismal team for infants, and talking about how have they grown in their understanding of baptism. Not talking about what they're doing, but doing that, being the catechist for parents of children being baptized, the infants. How has that changed your understanding or enhanced your understanding of your own baptism? And that can be a way of getting conversation going of them having been baptized, or people confirmed, or people from the charismatic renewal in terms of the Spirit in their life. And choose wisely, but talking about within that. Eucharistic ministers for the Eucharist, reflecting on the Eucharist. Having them come in and talk about how has being a Eucharistic minister enhanced your understanding of this sacrament, your respect for, your devotion to it. Particularly those who take it to the sick. Their experience, I think, is a little bit richer maybe than the person who's just handing it out at Mass because of the personal interaction. So it's looking to those types of people. Those are the 3 sacraments that are celebrated. But then we're going to explore healing, sacrament of healing. Someone who has experienced the sacrament of healing of the sick. What was that like for them? What was that like for them? And opening up. They will not have experienced that sacrament. You have to be baptized. but they will have experienced anointing with the oil of catechumens, which is for strengthening, which is what the anointing of the sick is, to strengthen the person. So the aspects of that. Talking about matrimony, having someone if there's people in the community who work with marriage encounter or engaged encounter, coming in and talking about the sacrament of matrimony and how they experience that, what is enriched it for them. So you look to people who are, if you will, living those sacraments in particular ways, inviting them in to talk about it as they explore their own experience of it. Yeah. So ways of connecting. But we do that kind of afterwards, within that. Oftentimes what happens is people are bringing in all those organizations and ministries to get new ministers in their group or something. But the service piece, that's part of the catechetical formation of the catechumenal period. That should be already done. But now they can move into that. All right, let's take a break.
Just on a comment, because I was thinking, Jim, of like the pastoral council here has been working on coming up with goals, parish goals. And so what I could see in this model is that everybody shares the goal of creating more Christians, of growing Christians, as you say, growing Catholics. So we all share in this goal, but through that process, the whole community is getting woven more closely together, more knit together, So a whole nother goal is being a bigger, like a overarching goal that's really important to the sustenance of the community is happening as you work on this goal.
Right, so setting up, the pastoral council setting up some goals, one of it is to making more Christians. Well, that's the role of evangelizing, outreaching and then forming them. So this whole ministry comes under that because that's what it's about, right? And so it's helping the parish meet that goal. It's part of, this is part of the life of the parish. Yeah.
And I could see you can have the sub-goal of strengthening the community
through that process. Yeah. Jim?
That's very cool.
We have, you're talking to us about a formational process for people new to the faith. We know of a formation process for the diaconate. There's a bunch of stuff in the middle. What are one or two names of formation processes so that when we deliver a new Christian, that is it's output from this process? What uses that as inputs? See, we furnish these new Christians, and they're well formed according to your description. If they become stagnant at that point, it's useless. So what would be the name of any other process that would take them on?
Take them on. Oh, further that. Well, it's interesting that, okay, so Jim is talking about the formation process, and I'm glad you mentioned about the formation of deacons and stuff like that. When you look at seminary formation, there is the whole theological training. That's the instruction portion of it. But then there's a separate group who oversee the spiritual formation. It is distinct. And when we think about bringing in new Catholics, the very common is from the instructional model, the formation piece is missing. This takes it first from the formation and weaves it in. So what comes in? But then it says, and it's a national statute for us in the United States, is that while the formal period of mystagogy concludes with Pentecost, it really should extend through the whole year, right? Monthly meetings, so that we don't just drop them, but that we continue on. And in some respects, it's that first year, right? You're studying to be a lawyer. You got your degree and your first year, You're studying to be a doctor. Now you're out there, first year. You're entering into marriage, through all the preparation and everything. Now your first year. The need to have somebody around who's experienced to dialogue about the experience of what's going on as you, kind of matriculate those new waters, really wise. So, it does call for that to continue on. But I think that's also the piece of the weaving them into other ministries so that when now they're full members of the church and we as an initiation team are going to formally end our ministry with them, they're already a part of another group. They're not suddenly just released, but they're bonded in with some other group that's going to continue on with them. Yeah. And so the community then takes over its role of journeying with them. So remember it said, that afterwards, helping them to live the baptismal life is part in this regard, the faithful, helping them to live the baptismal life. So they don't go stagnant. They don't float away, within that context. Yeah. So.
So our RCIA program, and it's unfortunate that the pandemic hit when Father Kwame arrived, so I don't have any experience with him as the leader of our church, or of our parish. But when we had our previous pastor, throughout the RCIA program, it was emphasized that, we're welcome you. They were at masses, we had their pictures out, so everybody knew their faces and had their names and, what they were doing in the RCIA process, whether they were becoming baptized or they were, receiving. But it was always, because I was one of the sponsors for one of them, and it was always emphasized, not like pounded on them, about thinking about a ministry you can become involved in, and it was all throughout this process. And I had the pleasure and honor of being a sponsor for one of them, and so going to the classes and afterward, joining my ministry. So we were sitting together at Mass and doing the ministry, and it was like you became a friend and they were part of your life then, not just dropping in to be their sponsor. It was a good experience. So I see what you're saying, and that is it was very rewarding for me as well as for.
It often does enhance the faith of the sponsor. Yes, part of it, because aware of it and that type of thing. Yeah.
And it's kind of a good review if you were at Cradle County to go through the process.
Which sometimes is the role of the sponsor coordinator, is to be sure that the sponsors are up to date, so that when, bringing up something, that's not what Sister Mary of the paper plate taught me, Yeah, yes, right. So that they're up to date on that stuff, but it is so that they can also help to guide them. Not that they become the catechist. That's a different job. And oftentimes when you're inviting people to be sponsors, they're hearing catechist. You got to be really clear about that. But that sense. And so making a note. I know situations when I was in Houston, a couple of the catechumens mentioned to me about being out shopping one day, and several of the people of the parish, it was just after the rite of acceptance, so they were very public, came up into the grocery store and said, "Oh, hi, so-and-so," and called by name and said, "I know you from the parish. I'm so-and-so." Because they saw them and they recognized them, but they knew to say hello. They weren't in the parish. They're at the grocery store. But, oh, I'm recognized. I belonging, so it's good. Yeah. Well, let's take our break.
And time to eat.
That's right. We have some food. And then we'll come back and we will talk about the role of godparent and sponsor in our second session. All right, well, welcome back. We're going to move on now for our second part. Having looked at kind of that general overview of the ministries and the ministers, we're going to now focus in a bit, and we're going to look at the role of the godparent and sponsor, okay? When I think of these ministries, what I like to say is it's not just window dressing anymore. And where I get that from is it's oftentimes they only show up for the rites. It's the only time you see them. And they're not seen as an actual minister in the rite, in the whole process. And so it's like ecclesiastical window dressing. Oh, here's the sponsor. Oh, here's the godparent, Rather than, no, they're active ministers throughout the whole time. These ministries, in fact, are often confused, okay? But they're different ministries. Paragraph 10 tells us this: it may happen that it is not the sponsor for the rite of acceptance in the period of the catechumenate, but another person who serves as godparent for the periods of purification and enlightenment and of mystagogy. And it really should say, and for life. Okay, and for life. So there's two different ministries we're talking about. Oftentimes the experience is it's one person, but the rite anticipates that it may not be one person, but two different people. One serving as sponsor, and then with the rite of election, another comes in starting to serve as the godparent. the sponsor ministry is probably one of the key ministries in the whole experience because it really draws the parishioners in. But I always tell new directors, new coordinators, if you have nobody else to help you out, and you really got to do everything, give a lot of your energy to developing sponsors because they will have an experience. If you do the ministry well, understanding it well, and they go through it well, it will affect them and growth in their own faith. Janet, you mentioned that, how it affected you. And that oftentimes where the field for growing team members is in the field of sponsors. And so if you really develop the sponsors, then you're going to have people who will want to be on the team, who want to be a more active part of the initiation community that's there. In a previous parish that I was in, one of the women who was the sponsor coordinator, tapped on this one woman whom she saw at church a lot. The family was there, they were always present, but they weren't involved in the parish. But she just thought, and she got to know her a little bit and stuff like that. She invited her to be a sponsor. And so she came along and she was a sponsor. She really got involved in it, loved it, had a great experience with it. Eventually, the sponsor coordinator asked her to be a coordinator with her. And eventually she became the sponsor coordinator, while that other coordinator went on to be the team coordinator. And then she mentored her to be the team coordinator so she could move on to something else. And so she became the team coordinator, and she became the coordinator for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. All right? So you can really garner people out of the ministry of sponsor. As I say, if you don't have any other persons to do it, do everything else in the ministry, take care of sponsors. That's where you're going to get your team members. All right? So the ministry of sponsor is a temporary ministry. It exists from the time of the pre-catechumenate, although this is a mistake often made because it really doesn't talk about them in the pre-catechumenal period. They really come on the scene in terms of the text just before the rite of acceptance, that they should be able to speak on behalf of, have a sense of the person, that they're sincere about wanting to do this. Well, how do you get that? Well, by being with them through the pre-catechumenate. So you need to be a part of that. And so it's temporary through that pre-catechumenate and the catechumenate. The godparent is a permanent ministry. In canonical language, our church says a permanent spiritual bond is established in baptism. And so that ministry begins with the rite of election, and it continues on, as it says in paragraph 10, through the period of purification and enlightenment and mystagogy, which actually mystagogy is what we're in all of our lives, reflecting on the experiences we have with our Lord to understand them better. Okay, mystagogy is, yes, there's a formal period, but it's a whole way of living, and so it continues on through life. All right. So while it comes second in the sequence of ministries, I want to look at it first, all right? Because it's a little bit briefer in its focus, a little bit more particular, okay? So paragraph 11 tells us that their godparents, for each a godmother or a godfather, or both, accompany the candidates, okay? So they can have one or two, but they don't need to have two, right? If they do have two, it's a male and a female. Right, and think about how have you done godparents in the parish? Well, it's just whoever's been the sponsor becomes the godparent, possibly. Okay, but it's really seen as a new ministry. It could be somebody different. So, for example, because of the nature of the roles, the person's coming to you, and they're a relative in their family has been a real inspiration for them throughout their lives. But really now, as they're getting to take in, adult realities and stuff, they're recognizing that that person of faith has also been inspirational to them. And so they're wanting to become it. But that relative belongs to a parish 2 churches away. They're not qualified to be a sponsor in your parish. Even though they're fully active Catholic, they're not qualified to be a sponsor in your parish. We'll see why when we talk about sponsor. But they will be the ideal person to be godparent because they have the relationship that's there already and that will continue on, right? Fully active Catholic and that type of stuff. Really great for godparent. So they went, but we're going to provide you, that's great, and Aunt Mary can come along too, but we're going to provide you with somebody from our parish as sponsor. Okay? So the ministry begins on the day of election. Right? That's when it begins. And as a part of election, they are called on to give testimony that that person that they are going to journey with is ready for the Easter sacraments. They're present then at the celebration of the sacraments of initiation, but also throughout the Lenten period, as well as during the period of mystagogy. Okay. So I was in one parish and there's, well, the godparents don't need to be there for the scrutinies. Yes, they do. That's their role. So when they begin election, it's all through the Lenten period, all through the Easter period. And these are persons, they're chosen by the candidate, okay, but they must be approved by the priest. Now that little clause is in there because to serve as godparent, there are certain canonical qualifications. And these qualifications are present even for godparents of infants. Right. They must be a fully initiated Catholic. They have celebrated baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. And there must be no impediments for them participating in those sacraments, which usually gets into marriage questions. Okay? So if they are in an irregular marriage, not blessed by the church, they cannot serve as a godparent. If they're single, then that's no problem. But there's certain impediments. And so the approval by the priest is being sure that that person that they're asking meets all of the canonical parts of that. And this whole point of that they become this establishment of a personal relationship, spiritual relationship, what is that about or different, within that context? But it is there. And I think I came to understand a little bit better when in talking with Hispanic community members, when a parent of a new baby invites someone to be the godparent, the padrino or the madrina of their child, there's not a relationship just with the child, but with the parents. They call them compadres. And there's a relational change of their being together, which is purely cultural, if you will. It's of the culture, it's not of the church. That isn't the church's understanding, but it's part of the culture. And they really have it. And I remember discussing it with some Hispanic parents in the preparation of the children for First Communion, that we don't have sponsors in First Communion. Oh, yes, we do. Well, culturally you do, but the religious practice of the rite doesn't have them. And if you do, it should be the godparents from baptism. That's in confirmation now. But, and we were talking about that, and I said, my godparents did not have a change in relationship with oh, yes, they did. And it was really kind of interesting to see that conversation, because just as I understand what they're talking about, but I don't comprehend it, if you will, because it's not a part of my culture. They couldn't understand how it didn't happen, because it's not a part of their culture, in terms of it. So they're different. And it was, when we got into that dialogue and understanding, I still don't quite comprehend it because it's not, again, part of the culture. I got an insight into what do we mean by a permanent spiritual bond is established between the godparent and the person to whom they are godparent. There's a relationship that is formed there of a spiritual nature carrying through with them. And so it is for life. It is for life with that. And it is the responsibility of the godparents to show the candidates how to practice the gospel in personal and social life. Okay? Now that you're fully initiated in the community in time, they're the ones who are there to make sure that they continue on with it, helping them to grow in being a full-fledged Catholic, right? And they're there to sustain the candidates in moments of hesitancy and anxiety, as they move through, and particularly that first year, okay? That they get caught up with whatever, just keep them on the path, keep up with them. And to bear witness and guide the candidate's progress in the baptismal life, to be sure that they're living it out, okay, and that they're continuing growing it. That when seeing opportunities come by, hey, there's this workshop going on, there is this liturgy retreat happening at the parish, there's this, let us go together. So they keep them engaged in growing in their spiritual life. And that ministry continues beyond the formal end of mystagogy. It's permanent spiritual bond. Okay? So that role is pretty clear for us in understanding what we mean of it. It's the sponsor that's a little bit different. So let's look at the ministry of sponsor. Paragraph 10 tells us a sponsor accompanies a candidate seeking admission as a catechumen. And that's where we see in the right that it presumes they're a part of the pre-catechumenal period. Okay? Because they're accompanying them there. And the sponsors are persons who have known and assisted the candidates and stand as witnesses to the candidates' moral character, faith, and intention. And really what they're speaking about is at that right of acceptance. Right? Do you know that they're serious about it? Yes, I can testify they are serious. All right? And they know their intentions are good. Okay? When they showed up, they were trying to get the parishioner discount at the Catholic school, but they've moved beyond that. Okay? Now they're seeing this as something spiritual about this. Types of what was their motive for looking to become Catholic? That type of things. Okay? And so they do accompany those, but there are people who know the parish also, okay? And so they need to be culled from the parish. And one of the ways I like to talk about is the approach to sponsoring a passive ministry or is it an active ministry? How do we view it? A passive ministry. Oh, do you know someone who's Catholic who can journey with you? And so they have the onus of providing the person. That's a passive approach. The active approach is that we are recruiting people from our community who will serve as sponsor. And so we have someone from our community who will walk with you, who will journey with you. Now, there's some matchmaking that has to go on in that, okay? Because you just don't want to put people together. But so it means that the person who's been interviewing the candidates who are coming, the inquirers, have a sense of them. They can talk to the sponsor coordinator. This is some of the things they do. This is some of their background. And they're aware of the different people that they've been training to be sponsor. Oh, you know what? Leo will make a good connection. Leo has this interest. Leo has this experience. I think they'll match up. Let's see about that. And so they're introduced together. Right? So it's an active ministry in which the parish is providing them with the person. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do they know them if, they're new to the church, so they're not part of the church, and then you say that, like your last sentence there, that they have to know them of good moral. Mm-hmm.
That's the role. How do they know them since they're new to the church and stuff? And as the last statement says, they give testimony of their moral character and stuff. That's the work of the pre-catechumenate period. That during that pre-catechumenal time, they're spending time with them, getting to know them. Okay, sharing stories, sharing pieces, journeying with them in that. So they're setting that up.
I think what you were asking is how does one pick or find a sponsor? Like, is that what you're asking, Janet? Like, you're new to the community and
they're new to the community, and
the inquirer is new to the community. The inquirer is new to the community, but the sponsors are community members.
Right, but this person has not been part of the church, so how can you attest to their moral character if you...
You do that at the rite of acceptance. How do you contest to their moral character? That's at the rite of acceptance, which comes at the end of a pre-catechumenal period. So there is a time frame.
Known them, but it seems like...
Well, at least have a sense of them and that type of stuff. The heavy-duty testimony comes in at election. But that their sense they are serious, yeah, I can see them, and as far as I can tell of them, yeah, and they know of it. But it has to be beforehand, yeah. Yes?
Didn't you share that you need to interview them?
Well, yes, we shared that they would do it. Someone has been interviewing the inquirer, okay, to get to know them, to get certain things about them. And so in getting to know them that way, those types of things, speaking with a sponsor coordinator, this is some of their interests, this is some of their background, this is some of the things within their life and why they're looking to be a Catholic. That's all part of that initial interview and maybe a follow-up interview with them. Then talking with the sponsor coordinator, in our pool of sponsors, okay, I recommend that we've recruited from our parish, we've trained them to be sponsors, they're ready to go. This person sounds like that'd be a good match. There's a little bit of a yenta going on here, making a match. But it's not necessarily the full match because it might not work, but let's see about that. And it may connect, it may not. And if it doesn't, it's like, well, there's this person. that they try to come in. Because they're also going to be meeting together in the pre-catechumenal group. And so other sponsors are also chit-chatting, not just with the one person, you're getting them to know. So that by the time we get, because the sponsor ministry officially begins at the rite of acceptance. That's when they really take it. So you have that time period to see about making the match.
Actually, Father Scott and Mark, this was from the parish, we were part of that, went to a conference, and the idea of so many parishes are struggling with size, but also involvement, of having ministers. And this kind of approach was, instead of looking for a sponsor, look for somebody who could just invite this new inquirer to everything, so just, that way, like what you're saying, getting them involved in the parish community. So hooking them up with someone who, for example, we do have a mom of one of the faith formation families that wants to go through the process. And so the idea of finding another couple, another family, and say, can you just start inviting them to everything, bringing them in. So kind of almost a pre-sponsor. And then maybe that turns into being a sponsor.
But also sometimes the problem of doing a pre-sponsor, but just find people who will invite them to come to parts and be a part of that rather formal. Part of the problem is, you say to a Catholic, will you be a sponsor? What they hear is, will you be a catechist? Because they don't know the role of sponsor except for ecclesiastical window dressing. So when you're asking them to be what they're hearing is to be a catechist. That's not what you're asking them to do, but they don't know that. And so you got to be really clear about what it is to be a sponsor. Yeah, right. And that's why I say spend the time recruiting them, spend the time, because that becomes really what they kind of understand it a little bit more, with that. Let me look at the second piece. So it's okay. It's provided by the parish. So the parish is going to get it. We're going to talk about how to get them and recruit. They begins the ministry, though, in the pre-catechumenate, and they are the hinge. I like this image of the hinge between the candidate, become catechumen, and the faith community. They're the hinge. They know the faith community. This is why Aunt Mary, 2 parishes over, is not qualified to be a sponsor in your parish, because Aunt Mary doesn't know your parish community. She's not going to be able to put her arm around this person and bring them into this community. She's as strange to this community as the inquirer. It needs to be a member of this community who has a sense of this community who can bring them in. All right? And it can be done in different ways. An informal way of, would you at least inviting them in, and you find somebody who connects well and they want to journey with them. The pre-catechumenate is a wonderful time, if you think about this ministry as being a part of it, to kind of ferment who's going to be the one to journey with them through the rest of that time. Kathy, you had a question.
Well, it's just my brain is whirling because in the old days, sponsor meant a person that was going to go through confirmation with you when you were, anywhere from the age of, say, 11 to, 13 or whatever it was. So we've tossed that particular nomenclature, I guess. Is that correct? Those people have to be called something else?
Well, we still call them sponsors. Actually, canonically, that person who's with the baby is a sponsor.
Okay.
If there are 2
babies?
No, two sponsors, 2 babies. Yes, right. Yes. Let's be clear about what have we got doubles here. Yeah. If there are 2 babies, 2 sponsors, then they're called godparents, and they need to be male and female imaging the parents. But if there's only one, you don't need 2 at baptism. It could be 1. They're sponsored. They're not technically a godparent. That's canonical language. So, so in some respects, those are used interchangeably, and stuff like that. So the rite for confirmation does call for a sponsor. But what it hopes for, since Vatican II, is that sponsor was the godparent at baptism, because they're just building on the baptism. And what the rite took out of confirmation 50 years ago is a confirmation name. It hasn't been in the rite since it was renewed. So it just boggles my mind why parishes keep doing confirmation names. Read the rite, it's not there. Because you're building on your baptism. It was one of the big shifts of the council we'll talk about tomorrow, is to baptism. So you keep your same name. Religious orders basically stop taking religious names because that profession is building on your baptism. So seeing the connection, within that. But oftentimes, that person who was the godparent in his infancy isn't around for whatever reasons, life, death, or other things, and or spatially, so somebody else steps in as sponsor. But the role of sponsor is in the primary, and this is the primary vision, everything else flows out of it, is the person who really journeys with them in their faith formation, helping to weave them in to the fabric of the church community.
Okay, and nomenclature-wise, we are correctly, I hope, using the idea of catechumen. So, for example, when Rob was received into the church as what we used to call converts, but he had been baptized as a good Scots Presbyterian, and then when he came in, was received into the church, he was, in the old days, went through RCIA, but nowadays would not have gone through RCIA because he was not a catechumen. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, that's a variable. We have to, working with a baptized Christian coming into full communion should be inspired by this rite, but they're not a part of this rite particularly. Okay, and we're getting that clearer for ourselves. But we can't adapt it until we understand what the vision is in the primary form. So if we don't understand the difference between sponsor and godparent in its primary form, we can't adapt it to the other. All right, at the reception, he doesn't have a godparent. Would have a sponsor, but it's not a godparent. That's a baptismal, the start of the baptism. So, yeah, right, yeah. So it's like, okay, who's what, where, and what's the name of the player? Yeah, within it gets a little messy. So that's where we got to understand. Okay, let's hit those distinctions first off. Okay. Yeah, but I love the idea of the hinge because that really talks about the role of that sponsor, helping them to come in. Okay, and so they're the ones who recommend the candidate to the faith community at the rite of acceptance. Because in my journey with them, I understand that they are, they are sincere in wanting to be Catholic. Okay, they're not here just to get the discount at the Catholic school. They're not here, in the early church, the 4th and 5th centuries, it was a social status to be a catechumen. Now, just prior to that, 2nd and 3rd century, before the Edict of Constantine, the Edict of Milan, the Edict of Tolerance, by different names, in which the Roman Empire recognized Christians, and before that they were persecuting them, okay? Well, when the change then becomes an accepted community of people, and so your social status sometimes varied upon that. So there are all these people wanting to become catechumens because they wanted the social status. As bishops, pardon?
They wanted the discount.
If you will, yes. They wanted the discount in the school, right, They wanted it for other reasons, So as Easter was approaching, the bishops would call for those who are of catechumens ready to be, they weren't coming forward. They got what they wanted. They got the discount. Yeah, and so they had to change their process for it and stuff like that. So it's getting to know them in that pre-catechumenal period, to know of their sincerity, wanting to do this. And it might be a skeptical sincerity. Well, I think, but I'm not sure, because I've heard some things about you all. And well, we can correct some of those misunderstandings, but, it's not nickel down time. Election is. But this is, come and see, be a part of us. And if you will, when this ritual process of initiating adults into our faith community faded away, historical reasons of now we were baptizing infants, we thought the whole world of adults were baptized. When it faded away, it wasn't ceased by demand. No, we're not going to use this one. But it matriculated into other areas, and it went into the formation of religious life. It went into seminaries. And so these various steps and stages that we see in it are a part of those. And so there is this initial period of time of living with the community and checking them out, and then, entering novitiate. Okay, that would be like the rite of acceptance. You enter into novitiate, which is really learning about the community and really taking more. And they're, you're looking at the community more seriously. They're looking at you more seriously before profession. And then you live with it for a while, and this type of stuff, within it. There's in the seminary, you get into the training, and then you come to candidacy. All right, we're looking, this is getting serious. Do you qualify for moving on? This type of stuff. So it found its way to other places. So it is a progression of levels of belonging And so we want to be sure that their intentions are correct, with that. Now, organizing it, right? That one of the initial team members is a sponsor coordinator, okay, who's in that role. And one of the things that person is responsible for doing is recruiting members of the parish to be sponsors. And looking to other people in the parish to recommend people, seeing different things about it, inviting them. One of the good things to do is, in any of the ministries that we do, is to invite people maybe to come to a session to hear about it. Your coming isn't your committing to do it, okay? But come and hear it. We think you might have the gifts for it, and we'd like you to come and hear about it. Your coming is not your commitment to it. But you can also do the general invitation. We're looking for sponsors to come. But general doesn't necessarily recoup many, doesn't have great responses. So you need to do some individual, but you do put it out. But the coming there is not a commitment to doing it, and we're not committing to taking you for it, right? So it's kind of a free look, okay, with no commitments on either side. And then we explore what the role is and talking about it and stuff like that. And then following up with them, no decisions made. We'll follow up with you after you think about impersonal invitations, personal conversations about what are you thinking about this role, okay? And they may want to do that, okay, or not. And they may not want to do it now. It's really interesting. I think I like to do it, but right now my plate is full, Well, okay, but, when something comes off the plate, will you give us a chance to consider that, especially if you think that's a good person for that, okay? So they recruit them. They prepare them, all right? Now, part of the preparation is you really need to know, has that person, him or herself, been renewed in the faith, okay? Because if they're still operating with a pre-Vatican II faith structure and understanding, that's not going to be helpful. In fact, it's going to be very confusing, because they're going to end up saying, that's not what they taught me. And so the new people don't need to know the changes necessarily, okay? In time, when they're firm in it, you can say, well, yeah, we used to think this way, whatever, but not right away. And so, if they are been prepared, then we're moving to take the next step. But if not, part of the preparation is, let us do some renewal of understanding the changes in the church. Because you've been around, but you may not know why or what about them. And so there's some adult formation that needs to be done with these potential sponsors, okay? And that's part of the role of the sponsor coordinator, right? Then, those who are been renewed and ready, we're going to connect them, and I've talked about this already, we're going to connect them with inquirers, right? Going to connect them with the inquirers. And this is a great way to move beyond a September to June experience, that we have a pool of sponsors ready to go. So in January, when God decides to move this person's heart, not on our schedule, but, that's God's role. We don't have to tell them to wait. We have somebody who could journey with you till we formally begin, all right? You may not be ready to journey right away. And so then the conversation between the person who's been inquiring and the coordinator who's doing the interview with the sponsor coordinator then they can set them up and have it. Or even just looking to somebody less formal, like you were talking about, it's a mother, who has 3 children. Well, we have this other family, who has some children and similar age. It's a good connect. Would you be, journeying with them and in welcoming them to things, inviting with them? That's a good place to use that type of a sponsoring. And they may, in fact, then become the, okay, we're really enjoying it, we get, that type of stuff. And so, but we have somebody to journey with them immediately, not waiting till later on, okay? The sponsor coordinator sustains the sponsors. So in the midst of the ministry that's going on, they're meeting periodically with them to see how they're doing, maybe looking ahead to see what's coming up. We're going to be looking at these particular things. There's ritual coming up, getting them ready for that, okay? And so that they're able to, I'm struggling with this, I'm not sure about that. So we're taking care of them in their time, because the sessions where they're present with their person they're journeying with, the focus is them, the inquirers, their needs, their concerns, and their formation, not the sponsors. But we want to make sure we're taking care of them. And so that means to sustain them, feeds them in their ministry, helps them out. Reviews with them, how are their inquirers doing? How are their catechumens doing? You know, when we move to a group process, and it might not be a large group, but a group process, we can lose the individual in the group. I like to call this the Lexington Avenue subway experience. You know, you get on that Lexington Avenue subway and it's really full and you're going to Broadway, but but at one other stop at 42nd Street, this big crowd gets on and you kind of get caught and you find yourself on the platform of 42nd Street when you're going to Broadway. That individual got lost in the crowd, right? The sponsor is the one who keeps the pulse of that person so that the individual doesn't get lost in the crowd. Oh, my person did not understand a thing that happened last week. Is so confused. Okay, so what do we need to do? How do we help them out? Or another case I had was a person, we knew this about the person. She was an addictive personality and she had been through recovery programs and she was, in recovery and working the program and doing good. She doesn't show up for one of the sessions. And the sponsor rather, said, well, I called her. I thought she was coming. I was surprised. She wasn't there that Sunday at the Mass with the dismissal. Check in on her. She doesn't come to, oh, I did. But she's not here Tuesday night. Check her. And so like, what's happening? So we said, you need to go see her. So she went to see her. Well, she had relapsed. And she was embarrassed. And she couldn't come to the group because she felt she had let them down too. Right, so that's where we find out. So, okay, so that's the sponsor comes and tells about. Okay, tell her we have these prayers of anointing of a catechumen to strengthen them. She's weakened, she's fallen in her weakness. We have a way of praying with her to strengthen her to get back up again. And it's not condemnatory, it seeks to help her. And would she like that? And we can come to her and do that there individually, or you can do these anointings in the public. But given the nature of this, we thought maybe it's because they don't know why she's not showing up. We know they don't. And she may want to keep it that way. So she goes back and she talks about, yes, she would like that, but she'd like to do it, individually, not in the group. It's okay. So the sponsor, myself, and the coordinator for the team, we met with her and we did one of the prayers of anointing with the oil of catechumens and, prayed with her in that type of stuff. And that's what got her back on her recovery trail. And she was back with the group, right? Without that sponsor, we wouldn't have known why. But she was able to keep the pulse, right? So they really let us know where they are. Where are they struggling? Where are they doing it? Where are they doing it? Because the whole group might have got it, but they missed. So how are we going to help that person understand? Okay, let's get the resources for that person, and we're using the sponsor as a way to get there, right? When it's coming to the rites, they're the ones who rehearse so that they understand the ritual, they know the movements in the ritual, so that in celebrating the ritual, they can guide the person through. The inquirer, the catechumen doesn't need to be present for the rehearsal because then they get caught up with, and they start guiding the sponsor around. Well, no, the sponsor's the guide. So they know the movements, they know the gestures, they know the cues for the moves, and they guide them. And they just enter into the experience that they'll unfold later. And so they do the preparations for the rites, okay? So that's the sponsor coordinator's role. It's a big task. Might want to have some assistance in it. The ministry of the sponsor, how they do it, okay? The sponsor befriends the person, gets to know them, gets to journey with them, doesn't have to become the intimate partner type of person, but befriends them and develops a level of trust. And that builds over time. We know what it means to build trust between people, okay? Clarifies things for them. If they got confused in something, clarifies that teaching, that tradition of the church, or they've had questions that go on further from what they learned to help them. Doesn't mean that they're the catechist, but they know how to get the clarification. Let's go talk to so-and-so, or let me get this, or let me find that, but so that they're helping them to further understand things when something's not clear in the sessions, okay? They monitor them. How are they doing? How are they, journeying through it? Are they getting lost in it? Are they moving along? Are they taking it seriously? Is something coming up in their life that's distracting them from being able to be attentive? How do we give them space then, but to keep them on board? All right, that's that keeping the pulse. It challenges them when it's necessary and appropriate. That they're seeing something in their life that's contrary to where we're about. How are we going to do that? So they can also challenge, which leads to why it is not good to have an engaged couple, the fiancé be a sponsor, Or in a married couple, the spouse be the sponsor. Because in any of those relationships, it's value-laden, and there are probably areas that need to be discussed, but for peace between, but they don't discuss it. But it needs to be discussed. And so a third party is, but it doesn't mean that the fiance or the spouse can't be a part of the formation process, but they shouldn't be the sponsor. Because it's for the person. They may need to want to talk something about, but they can't talk about it with that fiance or that spouse because it's value-laden in that context, but they really want to explore it. And so having that other person that's not involved at that level is kind of critical. The sponsor connects them. This is that role of the hinge, connects them to the parish. Bring them, hey, you know what? There's this event happening at the parish next week. How about we go together? And so while they're there, they're meeting other people. Okay, they're taking the advantage to meet them with that. And it could be a spiritual thing. It could be just a social thing. It's the parish festival. Okay, let us go join my family. We can come together. Because they're going to be a little bit shy about doing that. They don't know the group. And so it helps. But they're also making sure that they meet other people, connecting them to it. They fill in the gaps. They fill in the gaps. Sometimes a particular concern about Catholic teaching, Catholic practice, is that person's concern, but it's not the group. And so it hasn't been looked at, but they're struggling with their one. Okay, so they get to fill it in. It's kind of like the clarifying, but clarifying is usually because we've taken something and I didn't understand. Filling in the gaps is we're not taking that, we're not looking at that specifically, but that's a concern. And so we want to address it with that person about how that came to be or what is it about in the church, that type of thing. Adults learn best when it's a question. So if it's a question for them, but the whole group doesn't have to go through it. It's not the question for the whole group. So they're not going to hear the answer, but let us address the answer to that person. Supports them, okay? When things get rough or tough or, how do we do it? And that's the case of the addictive person was a case in which the sponsor was really a support to her. And then testifies, okay? Testifies. In the first part, in the rite of acceptance into the order of catechumens, yes, they are serious about it, but at the end of the period of catechumenate, in the rite of election, there is the call for testimony to show that they have done a conversion experience. They are ready for the sacraments. And that is, as I talked about godparent, that begins with the rite of election. And so in a ritual gesture of questions and answers with the bishop, they do that part. Especially if you're going to change persons in the role, this is a marvelous time in the rite of sending at the parish, gathering the testimony of the pastors, and so trusting in the testimony of the people, he can recommend the catechumens to the bishop, that the bishop would then admit them to the Easter sacraments. It could be a wonderful way of concluding the ministry of sponsor. Okay, and so because now Aunt Mary's going to take over, how do we do some ritual ending of that? And so they give testimony in the rite of sending in the parish, which can be that they're the ones who answer the questions if it's just a ritual form, or maybe it's developing a more spontaneous. I'd like to tell you about my catechumen that I've been training with, how I've seen them grow in the faith, how I've seen them responsive to the Spirit, which convinces me that it is God who has called this person into our community. And so they give testimony, and that concludes their ministry, because they're handing that person off to the godparent. So there's two levels of testimony that happen. In the rite of acceptance, yes, they're sincere about it, but then in the rite of sending for election, how have they grown in the faith and shown a real sincerity about that, okay, of that. So that's kind of the work of the sponsor that's within it, particularly if it's seen as an active ministry and that they're doing it. And we nurture them and sustain them throughout. Okay? So, questions, answers, or comments on this ministry?
I think it's huge to really delineate between the sponsor and the godparent. I mean, I've never seen this laid out so well, that you can see the dance of both parts.
Okay. They're doing different things. Yeah. The one is very initial. The other is making sure that, because what can happen is they feel dropped. And the godparent really steps in to keep them going, keeps them connected.
Is the lifelong commitment, is the godparent. And the parish nurturer, in a way, is the sponsor. And you can
parish
get
nurturer.
both of those going.
a different role. Mhm.
Any other questions or thoughts or?
So here's what I hear you thinking. I think I need to find a different ministry.
Well, but how would you address, like, because the parish, it'd be interesting to know what other parishes are really experiencing, but having a hard time getting people back into ministries coming out of COVID. It gets-
Oh, yeah, they're still kind of, there's the
It's-
COVID scare that's still there, yeah, how did
Yeah, well,
yeah.
and people have gotten, I don't know what any thoughts on that, but it's yeah, lots of bridges to build, that's for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's a generic question for parishes, how to bring them back and stuff. And I think that while we're still in this period of time when it's not over, so we're kind of in limbo. Oh, where'd limbo go? Here it is. Where, we want to be good friends from the parish in Tucson, an elder couple, they were in their 80s, went back to church the first time recently. And they said, I was very appreciative of the protocols that are still being held. I feel comfortable going there. In the Diocese of Tucson, the bishop was very proactive about how parishes were managing during this period. And eventually he did allow for removing most of the protocols, which were, the social distancing, the mask requirements, all of this other type of stuff. He removed them, but one Mass. And he said probably the preferable would be the early Mass on Sunday, your first Mass, because that generally tends to be your older population, that the protocols are still maintained there. And so it's masked up and they have to be socially distanced, every other pew, space between. And I think that's where this couple went, because I know that parish is having, and they felt comfortable there. She said, well, we're going back to church. We're going back to church. And so I think it is part of that sensitivity. There are people who don't care, but there are other people who are still very cautious. How do we provide for both communities? That type of thing, and welcoming back. I think the other part of it is, with my Carmelite friend in San Francisco, they've been live streaming everything, even their daily Mass. This morning was the last time they were live streaming the daily Mass. So slowly they're going to back out of live streaming because people need to come back to church, And so you have to know your community in terms of that. If you've got a much more older community, they're going to be a lot less excited about going back. With how do you help the protocol? So I think coming back out of that, yeah.
I think you also have to be a very accepting community.
Mm.
The fact that people are coming in and they're wearing their masks, just love them.
Yeah,
No problem.
yeah.
To be accepting of people coming in and knowing we're in different places and stuff like that, with that.
And don't expect, I think we need to remove our expectation that they have to jump in right now. They don't.
Right.
They don't have to be here. They want to be here. And because they want to be here, we need to be loving and caring and receptive.
And then setting it up, in terms of trying to be sure that we have some safety protocols, okay? Safety protocols that are there and you're really sensitive. So the parish that she was at previously that were connected, Palm Sunday night, the director of music and the director of liturgy tested positive for COVID. In Holy Week, the week of rituals, the two primary leaders in the thing, and then other members of the choir. I guess one of the choir practice was a super spreader. And so Thursday they had to change plans, moved back from the in-person. It was only live stream, and they had to kind of get around and just with that and get the word out to everybody else. 4 members, women in the choir came together. They did stuff a cappella, even in harmonies and stuff. The pastor called them his quarantine quartet. But they had to do that. But then they were able to come back in on Friday. People were stuff, but with it. So yeah, we're still in the midst of it. So you have to be, cautious and stuff. The parish has continually recommended, it has not required, but it's continually recommended that people wear masks. It's not a big space. They did the spatial distancing. It's chairs, so they took out all kinds of chairs, so it didn't feel like an empty place. But to allow but little by little adding chairs back in. But and people have been very cooperative. They'll wear them, all that type of stuff. Yeah, so we're in limbo of that and how to restart the stuff, with that. Yes.
I think on Easter Vigil Mass,
Uh-huh.
our parish was like so packed,
Hmm.
and I was gonna have to stand. I wasn't expecting the church to be packed because,
Right.
Well, first of all, it's Easter Vigil. It never is. I always say to them, if you got out early, if you got out before dawn, you got out early. What are you complaining about? It's a night watch.
but anyhow, there was like no seats left. And I was like, I was early,
Oh?
but, and I was expecting everybody to be outside at first for the lighting of the Easter fire, because I go every year, but a new parish for me, you know. And, but when I went in the church, I mean, it was like so full. And so there was a lady over on the right side, she had on a mask, and she said, here, you can sit right here. She was wearing a mask. So as a courtesy to her, I put the mask on because if it was important to her and everybody was so tight, it was just like sardines in there, you know? And so I wore the mask, and I think being respectful of in close environments like that, you know, can be very helpful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I was like, okay, we're going to be close. That's what the recommendation is. You know, if you're in a place where you're spread out, but if you're close to people, then you want to, you know, with that. You know, what's the ventilation, all those types of things. Granted, at this point, it looks like it's not as serious as it has been, but nonetheless, it's still serious, and we don't know the long haul. You know, yeah, and what effects it has in the long run. So for the safety of all, yeah, that's kind of good with that. All right. So.
I think it's so encouraging, and you know, we need, like, kind of, I think St. Charles, we're getting resuscitated in a lot of areas. So RCIA being one of them, which is so important. But what I love, what you presented, and anybody else's thoughts on it, is everybody taking a little parts of it. Is I think the refreshing idea of, you know, from the dismissal to the sponsors, you know, all the just different little parts of the hospitality. I think that's a really hopeful way to, as kind of rebooting everything.
I think the other thing is, remember, we're trying to look at the vision to see where we're going. It doesn't mean we can get there next year, but then to say, all right, what part of that vision can we implement this year? Take a step forward with it, and each year implementing more. But if we don't see the vision of what's there, and when this first came out, they said this is going to take 5 generations. Now, if a generation is 20 years these days, that's 100 years. We're only 1988. We're not even through the first 20.
So.
Can you maybe close with just like a little bit about how this started in early Christianity? How big, like, what the catechumenate was?
It was a 3-year period in the initial days, because in the first times of it was during the persecution, and so you need to be really sure that the person was serious before they could be. And so it was really gradually incorporated, because you wanted to be sure not just that they were looking for the discount, but even, that was even before, but they're not looking to find out where the Christian community is meeting, because we need food for the lions, you know, the persecution. And so it was a long, extended period of time. But also it wasn't in a Catholic, Christian context. So it was all new. So it did take time. And then Christianity became part of the society, and then we had the diminishment of it and the formation to the point where then it became really intense period of preparation that even got extended back. Lent actually has its foundations in this intense preparation for the sacraments, for these catechumens that had been around but not participating and stuff like that. Eventually it fades away. So yeah, the early church's experience of it, but when this renewal came before the Second Vatican Council. We talk about it as coming back in the Second Vatican Council, that's the official. But it was in the 40s and the 50s, particularly in the 50s, when the missionaries of Africa said, you know what, the way that we've been initiating adults in the Christian context countries, Europe and all, and this happened in France too, had become very secularized, it's not sufficient. The Father Smith instruction, Jackson, isn't enough. and we need something more. And so they recommended, could we go back to the early church's experience of the catechumenate? And so the Vatican allowed it as a trial experience. And so in the 50s, the 40s and the 50s, they started to do that, such that when we got into the 60s in the council, they recognized what a successful event that was. And that's when they called for the restoring of the early church's catechumenate, right? And part of that success was, what is the fastest growing Catholic continent in our world today? It's Africa. It's Africa. Because they're coming at it from a non-Christian context, and so they're doing a longer experience, with that, and the formation is there, as well as it kind of revitalized some of the faith in France. And so that out of that experience, then the council put it back in. So, but it sees it as the norm, not as that which we're doing the most, but is normative, and that all else should follow from it, and be inspired by it, within that context. And so there's a lot there. Looking forward, I mentioned to you that in our chat prior to the beginning that the Federation of Diocesan Liturgical Commissions is preparing to have a series of webinars exploring the different parts of the rite with the renewal of the rite, with the revision coming out, anticipated sometime in 2023 probably, the rite being promulgated in its revised form. But the series beginning somewhere in December and stuff. And so they'll have these webinars on. I think they're like a 90-minute period that will be there live streamed, but I think they'll also be hung on a website or something you can go back to, that type of thing, posted with it. And they'll be looking at all the different parts of it, so kind of be attentive to it, because it's quite a listing of it. As mentioned, I'm one of the presenters on the baptized, but I was looking at all the different facets of it, and they're talking about discernment, they're talking about ministries of sponsors, they're talking about all the different parts besides just the formational pieces. So it'll be a great thing for team development, with that. Great.
Great, well, thank you so much. And
Shall we conclude giving God glory? Glory be to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
well, thank you, Father Ron.
You're welcome.
Great.